Before I introduce our next speaker, because I know a lot of people will have a tendency to cut right out after the last speaker says his thank yous, I want to give you just a bit of a sneak preview to what's coming up next. As we said at the outset of the event, this is a regular themed research cycle that we do here at the Wharton Customer Analytics Initiative. And we've already, well, we have chosen but not yet announced our theme for next year. So I'm putting this out there in particular to the researchers among you. Well, anyway, here it is. So, where's my unmute? There we go. So looking ahead to next year, our theme is going to be innovative approaches to measuring advertising effectiveness. Everybody's out there looking at ROI of different kind of advertising. I'll tell you my own particular personal interest would be assessing advertising effects using granular customer level data instead of the traditional aggregated marketing mix models. But that's not the only innovative type of advertising effectiveness measurement going on. So we're also very interested in experimentation. Certainly you've seen that that's been a big recurring theme through our time together today. And we're open to other approaches as well, whether it's interesting data sources or analytical methods that might help us really truly get at ad effects in a way that was just basically impossible before. So this will be the theme for 2013. Researchers, start your engines. We'll have a call for proposals going out real soon, and it's the same rules. Just tell us what you have in mind, what you'd want to do, what you need from us in terms of money or data. We will judge those proposals through the spring, choose roughly the number of winners, well, however many worthy ones there are, but usually like 8 to 12. And then everybody, practitioners included, will have a conference right here around this time next year, where just as we're doing this year, we'll bring together a handful of those academics who received the support and have done some really good work with it, as well as perhaps some other academics, and equally importantly, practitioners who can offer their own perspectives about innovative ad measurement and comment on the work of the academics. This one we're going to be doing in conjunction with the Future of Advertising project, which is a large chunk of a different research center run by our colleague Jerry Wynn, who runs the SEI Center. So there are some of the details. We will share this slide with you, as well as a lot of the other conference materials. A lot of you have been asking, well, clearly we're recording everything, and so we're going to make presentations, both videos as well as decks, available after the event. You'll be getting emails from us. Rebecca, I don't know if there's anything more I can add about that. So we'll include this as well. So if you have any initial burning questions, no, we don't have a date set up yet, either for when the proposals are due or for when the event will take place. So just block out January and February of next year. It'll be sometime in then. It's more important than anything else you'd be doing. So. Moving right along over here, it is truly a pleasure for me to introduce Sam Ransbotham. Where is Sam's over here? Sam represents the future of academia, and I mean this in a couple of different ways. First of all, unlike most of us who have never worked a day in their life, Sam has done so. He's started up a business, he's run it, he knows what it's like to be on the other side as well. And even in the academic side, he's not nearly as siloed as many of us are. So technically, I guess you're in information systems. So if you had to put him in a place, he's not a marketing guy, but he does publish in marketing science. He reads and contributes to the marketing journals. He's not... he doesn't feel bound by the usual constraints, the silos that sometimes impede academic progress and academic practitioner communications. So a lot of breadth, broad interests, and the topic that he's going to talk about, it's actually remarkable that we haven't discussed it yet. In fact, let me ask real quick, how many of you have ever reviewed a product or service online? How many of you have actually submitted a review? Cool, a bunch of you. More than we have people playing games. And how many of you have done so, or have at least either contributed to or actively utilized a review on a mobile device? So it's a big thing. You understand that that's here to stay. It's not some kind of passing fad. It really does impact many of us. So I think it's worthwhile to hear a little bit about that phenomenon, where it is and where it's going. Sam, all yours.
All right, thank you all. I think you took away some of my motivation. I do want to say this is some joint work with Nick Lurie at Connecticut. Thank you all for having me here. I hope this is interesting for you. I wanted to start off by saying, and now for something completely different. Most of the time we've been talking about our consumption of content, mobile as a device for consumption. We're flipping over entirely here and talking about mobile as a creation. And so how does that make things different? And I want to go back to the good old days. So back in the good old days, restaurants and places would put up some of these sorts of things, suggestion boxes, right? Right? Idealistically, what we thought was when we wrote our important things on there that they would carefully read them and weigh them, and I don't know how much of that happened. There's an Office episode that some of you may have seen that kind of goes into that. The realism may be that they weren't quite as looked at or maybe thrown away, but the point is they were invisible. That's very different than what we see now, right? Our context is even different than what we call, the traditional restaurant reviews, critics. Critics are public figures. They have reputations. They're part of the ecosystem of the restaurants. There's a repeated game aspect of that here. So there's some differences here. What we're looking at is mobile reviews. So what is the modern equivalent of a fly in the soup? Right? You raise your hand and say, hey, waiter, come take care of my fly, right? Well, we don't do that anymore, right? We have technology, right? Photo. Tonight I got a free meal because there was literally a fly in my soup, right? That's not confined to the restaurant. That goes beyond the restaurant. The whole Twitter universe, maybe buried in 18 bazillion other tweets, but it's out there. Open up my Costa coffee cup and there's a fly floating. Seriously, I tried to think. Actually, I love this word blurg. I'm going to try to incorporate that in my vocabulary, blurg. So very different than what we've seen before. Chinese place, never go there. It's on 74. I want my money back, right? It's not just restaurants either. It goes beyond that. My wireless headphones broke already, all right? I want my money back. Watching Sherlock Holmes. I don't know what the heck I've been watching for the last 70 minutes of my life, all right? I like this one because this really focuses on what's somewhat different about mobile. They didn't say, I went home and thought about Sherlock Holmes. I compared it to all Arthur Conan Doyle's works and how they related. No, I mean, this person is literally, look at the gerund here, watching. They're real time. They're not evaluating. So we think that there's something fundamentally different. And actually, I put one more up here for the academics in the audience. Flyboy, I'm money. I don't even know how to say that like I'm supposed to be cool. So peep this. My professor comes in 50 minutes late and says, we're going to watch a movie, right? This real-time review stuff is happening not just in the restaurant context we're talking about. It's happening everywhere. And as I say that, I'm acutely aware of all the mobile devices in people's hands. I'd just like to point out what a wonderful-looking audience you are. And I can tell there's wisdom and yeah. Enough pandering. So this stuff is happening everywhere. We picked the mobile context and the restaurant review context, but it's everywhere. What's changing? Well, let's think about big trends. I think Ali Rama and Tim Rice and some other people really talked about social media and how the rise of that is going on. No surprises there. Lots of connections, lots of ways to make influence. Word of mouth has changed dramatically. While we're all here is this ubiquitous computing. People have these mobile devices in holsters on their belts, right? I don't think that's an accident that the holster is the analogy, right? People are ready to fire. They're in line. The line takes a little bit longer than they think, and they're important. And they will whip out their gun from their holster and take aim. But there's some differences here. There's some differences about time. There's some differences about the physical constraints of the device. And so we look at some of those. And finally, there's also something else going on here with our modern consumers. Maybe the lack of patience of our the way our world works. And what does that mean for business? How are all these things going to squish together? What's going to happen when these forces run into each other? So what Nick and I have done is we compared mobile and user devices, user reviews written on mobile with traditional desktop devices. 3 main questions. How do they differ in the content? How does the influence differ? And finally, what's driving these differences? And so that's what I'll talk about some today. What's the tension here? Well, in any good empirical story, there's some tension. If there wasn't, we'd just say, oh yeah, it's pretty obvious what's happened here. Well, there's a belief that reviews written in real time, remember my Sherlock Holmes example, in real time should really capture the event. They're right there. There's no recall bias. There's what's happening right there. On the other hand, they may also be impulsive and lack reflection and the kinds of things that we normally associate with some of the modern social media tools. So there's a temporal aspect. And then there's this physical aspect. The time pressures and trade-offs in how we use the devices may change how we work. So there's a lot going on here that makes this really not a clear question. So we picked restaurant reviews. Why? It's experience good. We don't know how a restaurant's going to be until we actually go and see if we like it. We try to proxy that by going out and talking to other people. We talk to our friends, we read reviews, everybody raise their hand about who's actually seen a review or contributed a review or read a review. So we try to proxy for that. So it's an experience good. So it's very good for this context. It's important. It's widely used. There's lots of literature from the academic side to draw on. I think it's interesting. And one thing that's fun about particular contexts is there's a very clean comparison, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of the people who are doing it. We have reviews from people who've written desktop reviews and those who've written mobile reviews, so we can actually control for the people themselves. All right, so let's go with a couple of examples here. I've pulled up 2, actually fairly at random. Font maybe a little small there. First one's I don't even know how to say that cool. I'm from the South, so we put slang and everything. La Terraza. Nice place, unexpected surprise, parking, et cetera, et cetera. We have flour and water. A little bit longer. Right off the bat, you can see the second review is actually probably twice the length of the first one. That might be what we'd expect from people, what was the thing, hammering with their index fingers, I think was the phrase that was used before. If you read these reviews a little more carefully, there's some differences here. Look at this first one. Nice place, parking, well prepared, well executed, food, parking. This review seems to me like the great personality label. There's not a lot here. It's a little vacuous. There's not a lot going on. Maybe somebody's little fingers were tired, use small words. Look at this one though. Rustic, comforting, well prepared, delicious, warm, thin crust, cushionless wood. This is a very different sort of review, right? And here's the reveal. This was written on the mobile device. That is completely the opposite of what I would have expected. It's longer, it's more involved. So there's something interesting going on here, and we started to explore that. These are some examples of the kinds of reviews that we're talking about. We pulled down close to 300,000 of these reviews. In this context, the users can read and write these reviews. There's not a lot of governments. There's some governments that goes on. We did a lot of parsing and downloading of the data. We've got a nice little Linux cluster that can grind its little heart out on these things. We keep track of who the user was, what restaurant they were, when they did it, the actual text of the review, whether it was done on a mobile device or a desktop device, what they recommend. Did they say, hey, you should go see this restaurant? Did you like it? Or did you dislike it? So what's the recommendation? And finally, the number of people that found that review useful and interesting. So the number of people that liked that review. Okay. We have some complete data here. This is my total of 300,000. For the most of the discussion today, I'm going to talk about just a focal subset of about 49,000 reviews. And these are reviews where we had the same user doing a mobile review and a desktop review. And what's really nice about that, and that comes back to the clean comparison that I was talking about, is that we can get rid of somebody who's individually very influential or writes in a certain way or has some sort of particular user attributes. We can get rid of all that stuff. So empirically, it becomes very clean. So what's happening over time? When we first started looking at this data, we said this actually as a theme, the dark red is desktop and mobile. That's going to continue through the remaining slides. Lots of desktop things initially, but then we see the rise of mobile, where right now it comes out to almost half. I think that's 45% if you actually look at the numbers. So mobile, people are writing reviews on their mobile devices. It's not an unusual phenomenon. So what we did was we went in and did text analysis of what they wrote on the reviews. We used a linguistic inquiry and word count program. Some people at UT Austin had come up with this. It's used a lot for research in general, but also particularly around transcription, which is kind of fun to read about. It typically categorizes about 86% of the words. An example is that we'll come up with a measure of the negative emotion in a review. It uses words like hurt, ugly, nasty. These are negative words. What I do is I went to Amazon and I thought, well, people know Amazon reviews. I'll just randomly pick an example out of Amazon of a review of a book and thought, well, let's just pick one top of our head and see what people say, knowing what your customer's worth, et cetera. So I ran this through, and what we find is that there's a good bit of positive emotion in this review, no negative. You can see the big words, so people are thinking about this. It's a cerebral work, obviously. I looked at all the reviews on this page, and it's consistent. A little bit of negative stuff there, but I think this author's in pretty good shape. The positive and the negative ratio is pretty good. As an aside, I find this addictive. Once you start analyzing this text, really you can do it for anything. I think about the emails that I get from students. That was awful negative. Well, how negative was it really? Or emails that I get from other people, my spouse. So I've vowed to Stephanie to be 46% more positive, and I can actually quantify that now. I think about the peer reviews I get from my journal articles. How positive or negative are they? How positive or negative? You get sucked down to this. I lost a lot of time here. A lot of time. But it's fun. Go through it. It does a good job of capturing the essence of a review. So I processed the full text of the 300,000 reviews. Kind of hate to say that bullet point so quickly because of the amount of my life it took, but maybe we should just pause for a moment of silence about the time I'll never get back there. It categorizes things into about 4 different categories. Linguistic processes, psychological processes, personal concerns, spoken categories, which I ignored. In the end, there's about 68 measures. Many of these are actually highly related. So we actually, in our analysis I'll talk about here, we're going to focus on about 11 different measures that are fairly distinct. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, some nods. First question, how do mobile and desktop reviews differ? Don't worry about reading every single number here. I've got some pullouts here. So let's start off. As you would expect, the word count on desktop reviews, much longer than mobile. Not surprising there, right? If people are typing with their 2 fingers, they're going to type less. Looks like about half. I built a measure from this automated readability index of how complicated the wording structures were, how complicated were the sentence structures that they used. And they're actually approximately the same. If anything, mobile gets a little bit of an edge on the complicated sentence structure. That counters my prior. I thought people would be maybe shorter, briefer. I know I am when I'm typing. I wonder what's going on there. We can talk about some of that. So if anything, mobile has a little bit of an edge. This is interesting. Past tense wording. Although the blocks look about the same, look at this median line. Practically, there's a little bit of range in the mobiles, but the median is that there's no past tense wording at all in mobile. This is indicative that people are actually doing these reviews while they're sitting there. They're not saying, I had a great time. They're saying, I'm having a great time. Or the food is good, if not the food was good. So right off the bat, that's interesting, I think. tend to include about the same number of words. Maybe desktop is a little more social, including like, I think my family would like this, or I think other people would like this. Mobile tends to be a little bit more self-oriented. Positive emotion, actually, again, counter to my, I kind of built this thing up with the fly in the soup. I thought that people were going to be super negative in the mobile reviews, but we're not seeing that. Actually, the positive emotion, there's mobile, if anything, is a little more positive than the desktop reviews. There's not much negative in any of them. And I wonder if some of this may be our context and the site that we've chosen, but there's not a lot of difference in the negativity of the reviews. Anger. Very little anger expressed in any of them. And that's actually something I was expecting. When I set this thing up with my fly in the soup, I was expecting people to be shaking their tiny fist. And we see very little of that. We also don't see many swear words, which I checked for. Some of that is I think the website, the review site actually filters some of that stuff out. So that's a pretty easy filter. So I guess that's more indicative that their filters are working pretty well. About the same cognitive processes, maybe a little bit more in desktop where people are thinking a little bit more about it. These are I believe, I think, so a little bit more. Perception, much lower. A little bit counter to my expectation that in mobile reviews, people are I believes, I feels, much less. Wider range though. So we see a good deal of variation in mobile and desktop, and not particularly in the areas that I would have expected. So what do they recommend? What do these reviews recommend? So the first thing we did was we put all our focal reviews into a order logistic regression, and the rating is dislike at the bottom, neutral, like, and really like. And what we see here is initially mobile is negative. So mobile is much less likely to like your product or service. Then the next thing I did was I included all the other attributes we just talked about in the regression and say, okay, how do these other things that we think are different about mobile and desktop, how do they? So we pull those in. And then I put mobile back in. And I was surprised here. Because I thought that if we control for all the differences in mobile, all the things that make mobile different, we would find that there was no effect of mobile. But instead, the effect of mobile is just as strong, if not even stronger. So there's something going on beyond just the things that we've measured, just beyond the content that we've seen here. I've got another model here, which is a different sort of hierarchical Bayesian analysis. If anybody's interested in that, we can talk about that. Entirely consistent with the results here. So our conclusion is that across the board, no matter what we do, mobile reviews are just more negative. Even after trying to control for all the things that we think are different about mobile are more negative. All right, that's about what people are recommending. Well, what about people? How do people like the reviews? Well, if you look at this distribution, this is the number of people that liked each review. So they click on the website, they can say, this review helped me, I like it. As you see here, it's a count variable, tapers off pretty quickly. If you look here, this is taller, indicating that mobile reviews, much more likely that nobody likes that mobile review. This is descriptive, so we did a regression model here and said, how influential are these mobile reviews? It's a negative binomial regression. We include what the score was. So what we see is that people actually find reviews that dislike a place to be very influential, much more influential. That's a positive coefficient. If you really like it, it's positive as well. So people are attracted to reviews that are extremes, positive or negative. Not much going on with just the neutral and the like. Mobiles are negative. So mobiles are less influential than the desktop. So again, like before, I pulled in all of our other attributes about the content, and I thought maybe this would make the mobile effect go away. And in fact, it doesn't. It does dampen it just a little bit from negative 0.44 to negative 2.7, but it's still significant and negative. So even beyond all the other things that we've seen about mobile, mobile is still negative. So users are less influenced by mobile reviews than desktop reviews. I think that's interesting because if you go back to the website when I showed it to you, all that's different there is that it says this was done on a mobile device. Right? Could that be the only thing that's different? Well, here are the differences we see. In terms of content, shorter, no less complex, a little bit more positive, definitely closer to real time, surprisingly not negative or angry, which is what I thought, a little bit less cognitive, a little bit more effective, more likely to be negative. We think that they're temporal, maybe physical explanations for that. In terms of the influence, they're less likely to influence others. And then the why is really the big question here. Is there some sort of expectation bias? Is there a heuristic people have that they're saying, well, this is mobile, it must be inflammatory or non-reflective? So we're doing some additional work here to try to understand those from an empirical modeling standpoint. We're also trying to understand why these things are happening. What's the underlying reason that people are getting to with this? So is it placement on the page? There's some other things that could be confounding this. Are people choosing to do mobile things only when they're really happy or really sad, really mad about something? Not sure about the use of likes as an influence. So there's some things that are less than perfect about our secondary data. So that actually leads well to an experiment. So let's try to control for all these things. So we've done a scenario-based experiment. So put people down and we give them it's a 2x2 design. Give them a positive review and a negative review. We label some of them desktop, and we label some of them mobile. Bear in mind the reviews are exactly the same. They're just labeled mobile, labeled desktop, right? This is an example of one of the reviews that's in the scenario here. And we rate, at the end we ask people to rate their credibility, whether it's positive, whether they thought the review was positive or negative, how similar they felt like the reviewer was to their own personal values, how much influence this would have on them, and then a little bit about the timing, about when do they think that they were sitting in the restaurant when they wrote this. And again, reviews are the same. That's the secret, the dirty secret here is that the reviews are identical in both cases. And so what we see is the usefulness of reviews. There's a difference in positive reviews, there's not a lot of difference. But with negative reviews, that the mobile is seen as much less useful. And remember, again, the text is exactly the same here. So people think that this mobile is much less useful. So then we started to think about, okay, why would that be happening? And then the follow-up question here is, well, how credible do you think this review is? And again, we see that in the case of the negative reviews, they feel like they're a little bit less credible, but in the positive reviews, a little more credible. I have to caveat this by saying that this is kind of hot off the press, and we don't have, we have a very small sample size so far, but we're still working to expand that. So overall, what we're doing is trying to understand what is it about this mobile that continues to influence people in a negative fashion. Finally, to kind of put this in context in the last minute here, stepping back, how does this affect the relationships that are at place here? We have the focal firm and the focal customer. Well, there have always been interactions with the firm to the customer. There's always been interactions from the customer to the firm, going back to my suggestion box that I had before, right? What's different now is that other people can view these. What was tucked away in a suggestion box couldn't be seen by anybody before. Now these reviews are public, they're visible, and firms have to worry about them. Other firms can see what's going on. Other customers can see what's going on. More importantly, everyone can observe what's happening between the two customers. So when we're in this mobile environment, in the social media environment, all the different interactions are much more public and much more visible. And that really, I think, leads to some of the, the final minute here of implications, is they're trying to understand which reviews are going to influence people. Companies are actively monitoring social media and other outlets, which ones should be engaged, which ones are likely to just fall by the wayside, which ones should be responded to. How can you, given that mobile is happening, how can people respond to and try to profit from this? And there's mechanisms to think about encouraging or discouraging mobile reviews. Do you have Wi-Fi in your restaurant or not? That's actually going to encourage people to. I'm not positive that's something you may want to do or not. So we'll see what that. And that's the kind of where we are with our research, and we're interested and open to where you think that this should go next, and what suggestions you think would explain why mobile is negative, despite all of our other controls. Thank you.
Sam, thanks Thanks for a great talk. It's a pleasure to be your friend and colleague. Cheers. So.